My name is Lynnette Okafor, and I am 31 years old, and I want to tell you exactly how I lost 4 years of my life to a man who smiled at our wedding like he had just won something. Everything was in place. The acceptance email from the nursing program at the University of Washington was saved in 3 different folders on my phone. My NCLEX prep books were stacked on the nightstand. I had been working double shifts at the clinic reception desk for 4 years straight, skipping vacations, skipping brunches, skipping the kind of slow Sunday mornings that other people take for granted. I drove a 2009 Civic with a cracked dashboard, and I packed my lunch every single day, and I told myself every single time I peeled off my shoes at midnight after a 12-hour shift that it was going to mean something. That one day I would be the one in the scrubs, not the one checking people in. I had done it. I had actually done it. And then I made the mistake of coming home and telling my husband. His name was Rowan. We had been married for 2 years at that point, together for 3 before that. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly, and only when it benefited him. When I first met him, I thought his confidence was something I could borrow. I thought standing next to someone that's certain of himself would somehow make me more certain of myself. I was 26, and I did not yet understand that some men's confidence is actually just a very convincing way of taking up all the air in the room. When I told him about the acceptance letter, he did not say congratulations. He looked up from his phone, set it face down on the couch cushion, and asked me how much it cost. I told him the tuition breakdown. I told him I had already looked into the financial aid package, the federal student loans I qualified for, the part-time hours I could pick up at the hospital attached to the program. I had a spreadsheet. I had actually built a spreadsheet. I showed it to him. He looked at it for about 4 seconds, and then he handed my phone back to me and said, "We can talk about it later." We did not talk about it later. Every time I brought it up over the following 3 weeks, there was always something else. He was tired. We had just argued about something else, and the timing was bad. His mother was visiting, and we needed to be present. I kept telling myself he just needed time to process it, that he would come around, that underneath the deflection there was a real conversation waiting to happen. I kept believing that, because the alternative, that he had already decided, and simply was not telling me, was too heavy to hold. The acceptance deadline was 60 days out. I needed to submit my enrollment deposit and my official transcripts to confirm my seat in the cohort. Everything was electronic except for one thing. My previous university had a policy, an old one they had never updated, where the official sealed transcript had to be requested in person or by an authorized representative, and the physical copy would be mailed directly to the receiving institution. I had submitted the request. The envelope was supposed to arrive at our apartment first for me to hand deliver to the program office, because I wanted to do it in person. I wanted to walk through those doors and hand it over myself. I wanted to feel that moment. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. I was at work. When I got home, I looked for it on the kitchen table, on the counter, in the stack of mail by the door. Nothing. I asked Rowan if the mail had come. He said yes. I asked if there had been anything from Eastern State University. He said he did not think so. I went back to the pile and went through every piece. It was not there. I asked him again, and he said, with the very specific flatness of someone who has rehearsed this, that maybe it had been lost in transit. I knew. I knew the way you know something in your stomach before your brain will let you say it. I did not sleep that night. I lay next to him in the dark, and I thought about every version of how this could have happened that did not involve the man I married taking something that belonged to me. I ran through all of them. None of them held up. In the morning, I called Eastern State's registrar. They confirmed the transcript had been sent. Tracking showed it had been delivered to our address on Tuesday at 2:17 in the afternoon, signed for by a resident. Rowan had been home Tuesday afternoon. I came back inside from making that phone call on the porch, and I stood in the kitchen doorway, and I looked at my husband and I asked him directly. I told him what the tracking information said. I told him it had been signed for. He did not deny it for very long. What he said after a pause that lasted long enough for me to hear the refrigerator humming was that he had done it for us. That nursing school would mean I was never home. That the program was in Seattle, and we lived 40 minutes away, and the commute plus the hours would mean he would barely see me. That he had just gotten promoted and needed stability at home right now. That we had talked about starting a family, and this was not the right time. And then he said something I have thought about almost every day since. He said, "You can always go back to school later, Lynnette. This is our life right now." I did not yell, I did not throw anything. I went very still in the way I have always gone still, when something is too large to react to immediately. When my body needs time to understand the shape of what just happened. I said I needed to get some air, and I walked out the front door, and I sat in my car in the parking lot for 40 minutes. I did not cry right away. The crying came later. What came first was something quieter and more frightening than crying. It was the understanding that the person who was supposed to be in my corner had looked at my future and decided it was inconvenient for him, and had acted on that decision without once asking me what I wanted. The next 4 days were the worst kind of days. Not dramatic, not loud, just gray. I went to work. I came home. I did not bring it up again because every time I tried, Rowan would either redirect to something about his job, or say I was being dramatic, or remind me that he had done it out of love. Out of love. I started to understand that in his version of events, he genuinely believed that. And that was somehow the most frightening part. On the 5th day, I drove to my older sister's apartment. She is not the kind of person who tells you what you want to hear. She poured me coffee and she sat across from me at her kitchen table, and she let me talk for a long time without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know that's illegal, right?" I had not thought about it in those terms. I had been thinking about it as a betrayal, as a violation, as something devastating but personal. My sister had a different frame. She told me to call the university program first, explain the situation, and then she told me to talk to someone at the Washington State Human Rights Commission, because what my husband had done, intercepting and destroying or concealing a document addressed to me, was not just cruel, it had legal weight. I did not fully believe her, but I had nothing left to lose by finding out. The next morning, I called the nursing program's admissions office. I explained what had happened as calmly as I could, which took effort. I am not going to pretend otherwise. The woman I spoke with, the admissions coordinator, was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I was not ready for. She said this was not the first time she had heard something like this. She said she would document my case and flag it for the program director's review, and she asked me to email her the tracking confirmation from the postal service and any other documentation I could gather. I sent her everything within 2 hours. The following day, I called the Washington State Human Rights Commission. They directed me to a family legal aid organization that specifically handled cases involving document suppression and coercive control in domestic situations. I did not even know that was a category. I did not know there was language for it. I had been calling it in my head something like cruelty, something like control, but I had not known there was a legal framework that recognized what he had done as a form of documented domestic interference. The attorney I was connected with was named Ms. Osei Bonsu. She was small, precise, and she had the energy of someone who had heard every variation of this story and was not surprised by any of it, but was also not indifferent to it. She sat across from me in a conference room and she took notes with a pen, and she asked me questions in a very particular order that I later understood was designed to establish a clear sequence of events. When I finished, she told me that the interception of first-class mail addressed to a private individual, when done intentionally and with the purpose of preventing that person from receiving its contents, carries federal implications under U.S. postal law. She also told me that in the context of a marriage, what Rowan had done could be documented as a form of coercive control. Not physical, but economic and educational, which is increasingly recognized in family court proceedings. She also told me she would send a formal letter to my husband requiring the return or accounting of the transcript within 72 hours, along with documentation of any other correspondence he had intercepted. I drove home that day and I did not tell Rowan where I had been. I made dinner. We sat at the same table. He told me about a meeting at work. I nodded at the right moments. I did not feel guilty about what I had set in motion. I felt, for the first time in nearly a week, like the floor was solid again under my feet. The letter arrived 3 days later. I was in the bedroom getting ready for work when I heard Rowan open the front door to get the mail. I heard him come back inside, and then I heard nothing for a very long time. Just silence from the living room. The specific kind of silence that is not peaceful. I came out in my scrubs, and he was sitting on the couch with the letter open in his hands, and his face had done something I had never seen it do in 5 years of knowing him. It had gone slack, not angry, not defensive, just emptied out, like a man who had calculated something carefully and discovered mid-calculation that he had made a foundational error. He looked up at me. He started to say my name. I told him I needed to leave for work, and I picked up my bag and I walked out. He called 4 times that day. I did not answer. He texted 3 times. The third message said he was sorry and that he wanted to talk. I read it on my break, and I put my phone back in my pocket, and I went back to the front desk, and I checked in a woman with a broken wrist and a man with his daughter who had strep throat, and I was very kind to all of them because that is what I do. That is who I am regardless of what is happening in my private life. And I was proud of that in a quiet way while everything else was falling apart. Ms. Bansu's office followed up with me the next afternoon. Rowan had contacted his own attorney, who had reached out to confirm that he did not have the transcript. He had, it turned out, thrown it away. He had put it in the trash. He had signed for my official sealed academic transcript, taken it out of the envelope, read enough of it to understand what it was, and put it in the kitchen trash. That information sat in my chest like a stone for about 2 days. Then it clarified into something clean. Something that did not feel like grief at all. Something more like the end of a long argument I had been losing because I had not known the terms. The nursing program's director had reviewed my case by then. What Ms. Bansu's office communicated to them, paired with my original documentation, was enough. The program director made a call that programs can make in documented extenuating circumstances. She offered me a deferral of 1 full year, with my seat held and my acceptance standing. She told the admissions coordinator to let me know that when I was ready, my place was there. I went to my sister's apartment that evening, and I sat on her couch, and I cried in a way that I had not let myself cry during any of it. Not the desperate kind of crying from the first week. This was different. This was the kind that comes when pressure releases, when something that had been built up behind a wall finally finds a way through, and the relief of it is so large it's almost indistinguishable from grief. I moved out 3 weeks later. My sister helped me. We did 2 trips in her truck, a Saturday morning in November, gray sky, cold but dry. Rowan's was at work. I took my clothes, my nursing prep books, my grandmother's quilt, the coffee maker I had bought with my own money, and my documentation folder. Every piece of paper related to my enrollment, my finances, my legal case, everything, organized in a red accordion file that I now think of as one of the most important objects I have ever owned. I did not take anything that was his. I did not leave a note. I filed for divorce 6 weeks after that. Rowan contested it initially. His attorney sent a letter that attempted to reframe the transcript incident as a misunderstanding, as a moment of poor judgment made out of marital anxiety. Ms. Bansu responded to that letter in a way that I can only describe as methodical. She laid out the documented sequence of events, the postal tracking confirmation, the registered admission from Rowan's own attorney that the transcript had been discarded, and the formal program deferral letter which referenced the nature of the circumstances. The contest was dropped within 2 weeks. During the year of my deferral, I moved into a studio apartment in Ballard. I picked up more hours at the clinic. I studied. I did my NCLEX prep in a consistent way, 2 hours every night after dinner, at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and whatever podcast I was working through that week. I bought a used bike and I started riding on weekends. I cooked actual meals. I slept through the night for the first time in what felt like years. I also did something I had not done in the 5 years I had been with Rowan. I started talking to people. Real conversations, the kind where you say what is actually true instead of the polished version that does not worry anyone. I told my coworkers about the divorce. Not all of it, but enough. I was surprised by how many of them said some version of, I knew something was off. One of the nurses I worked with, a woman who had been in the field for 20 years, told me that the women she had seen stay in controlling situations for too long almost always said the same thing afterward. That they had known for a while. They had just been waiting for permission to trust what they knew. She said that like it was a medical observation. I wrote it down when I got home. The September after my deferral, I started the nursing program. I drove myself to the orientation. I parked my 2009 Civic, which I still had not replaced, because I wanted to wait until I was completely on my own financial footing, and I walked across the parking lot with my backpack and my red accordion file, and I found my seat in the orientation auditorium, and I sat down. The room was full of people at different points in their lives. 22-year-olds fresh out of undergrad. A woman who looked to be in her mid-50s who caught my eye and smiled. A man in the row ahead of me who was taking notes before the presentation had even started. I looked at all of them and I thought, we are all here because we decided something about ourselves, and then we did the work to prove it. I was not the same person who had opened that acceptance email 2 years earlier. I was not worse. I was not more wounded. I was just more certain. Certain in the way you can only become when someone has taken something from you, and you have fought to get it back by yourself, through your own choices, step by step, without waiting for an apology that was never going to come. 3 weeks into the program, something happened that I did not expect. I was heading out of the simulation lab after a skills assessment. It was late afternoon, early October, that particular Pacific Northwest light that turns everything gold for about 40 minutes before it disappears. I was gathering my things when the skills lab coordinator, a woman named Dr. Asante, who ran the clinical training modules, called me over. She said she wanted to ask me something. She said she had been reviewing the cohort files and that she had noticed my deferral and the reason it had been documented. She told me that she had flagged it not because of anything negative, but because she wanted me to know that she and the program director had been paying attention. She said she had seen students come through that program under all kinds of circumstances, and that in her experience, the ones who had to fight to get there were almost always the ones who understood what the work meant. She did not make it a big moment. She did not say it dramatically. She just said it plainly, the way you say something that you believe is simply true. Then she told me my skills assessment score was the highest in the cohort and sent me on my way. I stood outside on the sidewalk for a minute before I went to my car. I just stood there in that gold October light, and I breathed. It is hard to explain exactly what I felt. It was not triumph, not exactly. It was something quieter. Something that had been absent for a long time and had come back so gradually, I had not noticed it returning until it was fully there. I graduated 2.5 years later. My sister was in the front row, and she cried before they even started calling names, which is entirely consistent with who she is, and I love her completely for it. My parents came from Ohio. My mother held my hand for a long time after the ceremony and did not say anything, which from her means more than most people's speeches. Rowan and I have not spoken since the divorce was finalized. Not once. I do not think about him often. When I do, it is not with anger, not anymore. It is with something closer to the feeling you have when you remember a wrong turn you once took. A recognition of how much time you spent going in a direction that was not yours, and a quiet gratitude that you eventually stopped. I am a registered nurse now. I work in a hospital in Seattle. I specialize in medical surgical care, and I am working toward a certification in critical care. I have my own apartment, my own savings account that no one else has access to, my own name on the lease, my own name on everything. I saved for 4 years and studied for 2.5 more, and my husband intercepted my transcript to keep me from leaving, and I left anyway. I built something he could not reach. Not because I was exceptional or fearless or any of the things you are supposed to say you were in a story like this, but because the alternative, staying still, staying small, staying in a life that fit him and not me, was something I finally understood I did not have to accept. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. Every week we bring you true stories about the kind of courage that does not announce itself. The kind that just keeps moving forward, one quiet decision at a time.